The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet small-town street as an older man in faded jeans and a worn leather jacket walked into a local diner. His steps were steady, his expression calm. He looked like any regular person, maybe a mechanic, maybe a traveler. But what no one realized was he was Chuck Norris, a highly decorated military veteran known for legendary service long before fame. He sat quietly at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and nodded politely to the waitress. A couple of customers recognized him but remained respectfully silent, sensing he preferred peace. As he sipped his coffee, two patrol officers entered the diner, scanning the room with a heavy attitude. Their eyes instantly fixed on Chuck. "Hey you!" One of them barked, pointing directly at him. "You can't loiter here. Let's see some ID." Chuck slowly turned, not bothered by the tone. "Just having coffee, officer. Is there a problem?" The second cop smirked. "Yeah, you. Standing around like you own the place." His eyes scanned Chuck's dusty boots, patched jacket, and scruffy beard. They assumed he was a drifter, maybe even homeless. The waitress stepped forward. "Officers, he's not causing any trouble." "Ma'am, step back." The officer cut her off sharply. Customers exchanged uneasy glances. Chuck took a breath, calm as ever. "No need to raise your voice," he said quietly. That only provoked them more. "Oh, we got ourselves a tough guy," the cop mocked. "Old-timer thinks he can talk back." Without warning, they grabbed his arm. Chuck didn't resist. He simply stood up, dignified, finishing his coffee before setting the cup down gently. "You're under detention for disorderly conduct," the officer stated loudly for everyone to hear. Not a single person spoke. Some started recording on their phones. As they escorted him out, Chuck gave a reassuring nod to the waitress. The door closed behind him. The diner fell silent. No one there knew the officers had just arrested one of the most respected veterans in the country. No one imagined what would happen next. Just 30 minutes later, would turn the entire police station upside down. The ride to the station was silent, except for the crackling of the police radio and the smug remarks from the officers. Chuck sat in the back of the cruiser, hands cuffed, looking out the window. His expression remained composed, but his eyes reflected a depth of experience far greater than these officers could imagine. The cop driving, Officer Bradley, glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You know, folks like you cause half the trouble in this town," he muttered. Chuck looked up, calm. "Folks like me?" he asked mildly. "Yeah," Bradley grunted. "People who think they don't have to follow the rules. People who don't fit in." His partner, Officer Clark, chuckled from the passenger seat. Chuck didn't answer. Instead, he looked out again, quiet, steady. He didn't need to defend himself. He'd done that enough in war zones. The cruiser pulled into the station. As they escorted him inside, several officers glanced over curiously. Some looked confused, others indifferent. They were used to minor arrests, not elderly men who looked like they had walked out of a lifetime of stories. Bradley pushed him forward. "Room 3, he said. They entered a small interrogation room. Plain walls, metal table, single camera blinking red in the corner. Chuck sat down. Clark uncuffed one wrist just enough to anchor him to the table. "Standard protocol," he said mockingly. Bradley leaned forward. "Name?" "Charles Norris," he replied. Clark scoffed. "Yeah, right. Try again." "That is my name." Bradley leaned closer, now irritated. "Stop playing games. Who are you? Where did you come from? What's your purpose in town?" Chuck looked directly at him. "Calm. I came for breakfast." Clark slammed his hand on the table. "You think this is funny?" Chuck didn't flinch. Bradley shook his head. "You old guys, always dramatic. Just answer the damn questions." Chuck raised an eyebrow, voice low. "Is that how you treat everyone you misunderstand?" Clark stepped forward aggressively. "Watch your tone." But Chuck didn't change it. "Watch yours." For a moment, just a moment, the officers paused. The door opened, and another officer, Sergeant Harper, entered with a clipboard. "Status. Just some drifter causing trouble," Bradley replied. Harper glanced at Chuck. There was something in his eyes. A faint recognition, but not enough to form a conclusion. "We'll process him," Bradley continued. "Could be looking at charges for resisting and verbal harassment." Chuck looked up slowly. "I didn't resist." Clark smirked. "Yet." Harper hesitated. Something felt off. But hierarchy mattered. They continued the interrogation. The diner incident had already begun spreading online. A local college student had taken a video and posted it with the caption, "I think the cops just arrested someone they shouldn't have, This guy didn't do anything. Within minutes, the clip had started getting comments. One user wrote, "Whoever he is, he handled that better than most people would." Another replied, "That cop was out of line. Does anyone know the man?" People began tagging veterans' pages. Something was building. Where are you watching this story from? Which country or city? Let us know in the comments below. Back inside the station, the interrogation continued. Bradley tossed the clipboard in front of Chuck. "Sign this. It confirms your refusal to cooperate." Chuck looked at the paper, then back at Bradley. "I did cooperate. You refused to listen." Clark glared. "Just sign it." Chuck didn't move. Bradley leaned forward. "You know what? People like you. Thinking age gives them authority. You're not special." Chuck lifted his head slowly. "I never claimed to be." The tone of the room changed. Harper, still watching quietly, took a step forward. "Wait." He looked more carefully now. A scar above Chuck's right eyebrow. The way he sat, straight-backed, weight-balanced, controlled. His hands, weathered but ready. "You've seen combat," Harper said softly. Chuck looked at him. Said nothing. Bradley rolled his eyes. "Please. What is this, a war movie? He's just some old." Before he could finish, the intercom buzzed. "Dispatch to station command. We have incoming units. Federal." Everyone froze. Bradley frowned. "What?" The message repeated. "FBI vehicles approaching. ETA, 3 minutes." Harper slowly turned to Chuck. Clark looked confused. "Why would the FBI?" Bradley went pale. He turned to Chuck. Chuck finally spoke. "Told you." No anger. No arrogance. Just truth. The officers looked at one another. Something was very, very wrong. They had 30 minutes. 30 minutes to realize they had just arrested someone influential. 30 minutes before the storm arrived, the interrogation room was cold, dimly lit, and intentionally uncomfortable. Chuck Norris sat calmly on the metal chair, hands still cuffed, his posture straight, his eyes focused. Across the table, Officer Miller paced angrily. The door opened, and Sergeant Davis entered with a smug expression. "So, Mr. Tough Guy," Davis said mockingly, pulling out a chair. "You think just because you were in the military you can do whatever you want? You refuse to comply with our orders. That's obstruction." Chuck looked up slowly. "I didn't refuse. I asked what I was being detained for," he said calmly. "You never answered." "That's not how this works," Miller snapped. "You answer our questions. You don't question the law." Chuck gently leaned forward. "I am the law," he said, his voice low but powerful. Both officers laughed. "What are you, some cowboy? A movie hero?" Davis smirked. "No," Chuck replied steadily. "I'm a veteran, and I've served this nation longer than you've worn that badge." The laughter faded. Meanwhile, outside the station, news had already begun to spread. Someone had recorded Chuck's arrest and uploaded it online. Within minutes, the clip went viral. People recognized the man in the footage: decorated combat veteran, national hero, martial arts legend. Comments flooded social media. "How can they arrest him like that? That's Chuck Norris. He helped train elite forces." "Someone call the authorities. This is unacceptable." In Dallas, in New York, in London, in Tokyo, from multiple countries across the globe, viewers were shocked. On live stream chats, messages appeared in dozens of languages. Veterans groups in Germany, martial arts associations in Japan, and military forums in the US were furious. Some even began contacting federal hotlines. Within 20 minutes, the situation escalated beyond local policing. Back in the room, Sergeant Davis sat back, arms folded. "Let's get this done quickly," he said. "We've already contacted city attorneys." Suddenly, the door burst open. 4 federal agents entered, jackets clearly marked FBI. The local officers stiffened immediately. Agent Cooper, leading the team, spoke firmly. "Remove those cuffs. Now." Davis hesitated. "Wait, what's going on?" This man, Cooper cut in sharply, is a federal-level consultant for strategic operations and recipient of multiple classified commendations. "You arrested an active advisor without cause." Miller's face turned pale. Davis stood abruptly. We didn't know." "That," Chuck finally said, extending his hands as an officer rushed to remove the cuffs, "is the problem." As the metal clicked open, Chuck rubbed his wrists slowly. The silence in the room was unbearable. "The storm begins." The FBI agents began speaking over their radios. "We're requesting immediate file transfer on all officers involved." Internal Affairs notified. Protocol breach confirmed. Outside, more federal vehicles arrived. Local officers watched in disbelief as their station was surrounded. Agent Cooper turned to Chuck. "Sir, would you like medical assistance?" "No," Chuck said, "but I'd like to speak to the chief." Within minutes, the police chief was brought in, visibly nervous. "Mr. Norris, I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding." Chuck stood up slowly. "You don't apologize to me," he said. "You apologize to every veteran mistreated because someone decided they looked suspicious." The chief lowered his head. "You're right." Chuck reached for his jacket and put it on. His tone was controlled, but the message was powerful. "We serve this country so people can feel safe. But when those sworn to protect become the threat, that's when strength means standing up, even when you're alone in handcuffs." The world reacts. Phones rang across news channels. Radio broadcasts in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, USA, UK, Canada, Germany, India, and Australia discussed the event live. Social media trends exploded. Hashtag respect the veterans. Hashtag justice for Chuck. Hashtag stand with heroes. Thousands demanded reform. Civilians, ex-servicemen, even active duty soldiers sent messages of support. Videos surfaced of people in New York, Berlin, Dubai, London, Islamabad, and Toronto holding signs reading, "Honor those who defended us. No one is above the law, not even those who enforce it." And Chuck? As he stepped outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones raised. "Mr. Norris, do you have any comment?" Chuck stopped, looked straight at the camera. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for accountability." He turned and walked toward the FBI vehicle. And for every soldier who couldn't walk away, the door closed behind him. The world didn't see an actor that day. They saw a legend, standing not with fists, but with dignity. By the time Chuck Norris was seated in the FBI's secure vehicle, the gravity of the situation was clear. The local police officers who had arrested him earlier were left standing outside the station, pale-faced and shaken. The whispers that had begun in the diner had now grown into a low roar. People were beginning to recognize him, not just as a martial arts icon, but as the decorated veteran who had quietly served his country for decades. Inside the vehicle, Chuck leaned back in his seat, hands resting lightly on his knees. His expression was calm, composed, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes. He didn't speak much. He never needed to. His presence alone commanded respect. Meanwhile, outside the station, a young intern with a smartphone pushed through the growing crowd. She had seen the arrest unfold from her apartment window across the street and had begun live streaming. The camera caught Chuck being escorted into the vehicle. Her viewers immediately started commenting. "Is that Chuck Norris? No way, it can't be him. That's the Chuck Norris, the veteran." Word spread like wildfire. The crowd outside the station started murmuring among themselves. "That's Chuck Norris," one person shouted. "He's the one who trained elite forces." The police officers who had initially arrested him looked around nervously. Their faces betrayed disbelief. Could it really be him? They glanced at one another, silently questioning whether they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Inside the FBI vehicle, Chuck didn't react to the commotion. He simply adjusted his jacket, keeping his composure. This was classic Chuck Norris, silent, observant, and unshakable. A young FBI analyst riding along looked at him in awe. "Sir," he whispered, "people outside know who you are. They're recognizing you." Chuck nodded slightly, without looking at him. "Let them," he said. "Let the truth speak for itself." Back at the station, the officers had gathered near the front doors, trying to explain the situation to anyone who would listen. A few reporters had arrived, cameras rolling, microphones extended. The moment one of them spoke the name, it spread like wildfire. "Ladies and gentlemen," one reporter announced, "the man arrested here today is none other than Chuck Norris, decorated veteran and martial arts legend." The murmurs turned into gasps. Phones were raised, cameras clicked. Some of the officers outside went pale, realizing the enormity of their mistake. Sergeant Bradley, who had initially handcuffed him, took a step back, his face drained of color. Officer Clark muttered under his breath, "This can't be happening." Among the crowd, a young boy looked up and whispered to his mother, "Mom, that's the guy from the movies. He's a real hero." His mother shook her head. "Should just watch." The FBI agents inside the vehicle exchanged glances. They had been expecting a difficult extraction, but they hadn't anticipated the scale of public recognition. Chuck Norris had turned a simple detention into a viral event, without lifting a finger. As the vehicle started moving away from the station, Chuck finally spoke, addressing the younger agent beside him. "Remember this," he said quietly. "Recognition isn't power. Dignity is. Never forget the difference." The vehicle passed the crowd, but the whispers continued, growing louder. People began sharing footage on social media, tagging news outlets and veterans organizations. By the time the vehicle disappeared around the corner, hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Chuck Norris Veteran. Hashtag Justice for Heroes. Hashtag Respect Before Judgment. Inside the FBI command center, officials were watching live feeds from the surrounding streets. "He's a symbol," one analyst said. "People everywhere are realizing what just happened." And yet, Chuck remained humble. He didn't wave, didn't make a statement for the cameras. He didn't need to. His calm, composed demeanor spoke louder than any words could. The officers who had initially arrested him were left standing outside the station, humiliated, not because of public exposure alone, but because they now understood the full weight of their mistake. The very man they had thought to intimidate commanded respect, silently and effortlessly. For Chuck Norris, this was not about fame or revenge. It was about accountability, about showing the world that actions have consequences and that dignity can triumph over arrogance. By the time the FBI vehicle turned onto the main highway, the story had already reached international news outlets. In cities from New York to Manila, from London to Dubai, people were talking. The realization had spread: you do not judge a man by appearance, and you certainly do not underestimate a veteran. And somewhere deep inside, Chuck knew this was just the beginning. The officers would learn their lesson, but the world watching now would also see a powerful reminder. Respect is earned through action, not assumed through position. By the time Chuck Norris was fully inside the secure FBI area, the local officers were still reeling. Their faces were pale, their composure shaken. Every move they had made to intimidate him now seemed petty, almost absurd, in the light of who he truly was. The power dynamic had shifted completely, but Chuck didn't gloat. He had no need to. Sergeant Bradley, still visibly embarrassed, stepped forward, trying to regain authority. "Sir, Mr. Norris," he stammered. "This is a misunderstanding. We were just following procedure." Chuck's eyes locked on him, steady and calm. His voice, soft but unmistakably commanding, cut through the tension. Following procedure does not mean abusing power. You do not have the right to humiliate anyone because you assume their appearance tells you who they are. Clark shifted uncomfortably, realizing how exposed he now was. "But you interrupted me," Chuck said quietly, leaning forward. "Respect is not optional. It is not something earned by rank, by badge, or by authority. It is something you show first. And you have shown none of it." The room fell silent. Not a single person spoke. Even the FBI agents, who had come prepared for a routine extraction, felt the weight of his words. Chuck's tone was calm, but the authority in it was undeniable. "You see," he continued, "I've spent decades defending this country, training soldiers, serving in places where decisions cost lives. And yet, here I am, detained in a local police station, because two men assumed my presence was a threat." He paused. "Imagine how many others have suffered because of that same arrogance." Sergeant Harper, who had been observing quietly, cleared his throat. "Sir, we were wrong. Truly." Chuck turned his gaze to him, not in anger, but with piercing clarity. Acknowledging a mistake is the first step. Correcting it is the next. And understanding the impact of your actions, that is what defines character. Bradley tried to speak again, but Chuck held up his hand. "Stop talking. Listen." He gestured to the room. "Everyone in this station should take note. This is not about me. This is about justice, about humility, and about understanding that your badge does not give you the right to harm others." The officers shifted uncomfortably. Even Clark, the cocky one who had mocked him at the diner, looked down, ashamed. Chuck's presence alone exposed the arrogance and recklessness in the room. "Do you see the fear you caused?" Chuck asked, his voice soft but relentless. "Do you see how quickly assumptions and ignorance can destroy trust? You can't fix the world with threats, intimidation, or handcuffs. You fix it with integrity." The FBI lead agent, Cooper, nodded approvingly from the corner. "Exactly, sir," he said quietly. "That's why we got involved before things escalated further." Chuck's eyes scanned the room once more. "You were meant to protect people. Instead, you endangered them. But there's still a chance to do what's right. Admit your fault. Learn from it. Treat people with the respect you wish to receive." The officers swallowed hard. Silence filled the room again. They could feel the weight of every word. Chuck Norris, a man who had once faced armies and adversaries across the globe, was standing before them, not with fists, not with anger, but with quiet authority that demanded respect. Finally, Sergeant Bradley spoke, voice low. "We understand, sir. You're right. We were wrong." Chuck nodded slowly. "Good. Remember this. It is easy to wield power without conscience. Harder to wield it with integrity. Never forget that." At that moment, someone from the control room tapped Bradley on the shoulder. "We've already started the internal report," the officer said. "This will go all the way up the chain of command." Chuck gave a small nod of approval. Let that be a lesson for anyone who thinks authority gives them the right to judge or humiliate. Even the youngest officer in the room, who had been shaking since the morning, looked up in awe. Chuck Norris didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to act aggressively. The room was silent because his words carried the weight of truth, and the moral authority he exuded demanded attention. As the officers absorbed the lesson, Chuck leaned back in his chair. His calmness was intimidating in the most subtle way. He had made his point without striking a single blow, yet every person in the room understood that challenging him again would be a grave mistake. Outside the station, the viral video of his arrest continued to spread across social media. People commented in disbelief. He didn't even raise a hand. Just words, and everyone shut up. That's real power. This is why Chuck Norris is a legend. Respect always. Even news channels picked up the story. Interviews began with people saying, "He handled everything with grace." That's the kind of courage we need more of. Inside the station, Chuck finally stood. "Let this be remembered," he said softly but firmly. "Power without respect is weakness. Strength is measured by how you treat others, not how you intimidate them." And with that, the turning point had arrived. The arrogant officers had been humbled. Chuck Norris had not only asserted his own dignity, but reminded everyone present, and everyone watching, what it truly meant to stand tall, calm, and unshakable. The world was watching, and they would never forget. The hum of radios filled the police station. Outside, the first few FBI vehicles had arrived, black SUVs with flashing lights, and agents in tactical gear were stepping out with deliberate precision. Inside, the local officers were frozen, their earlier bravado completely gone. The realization that this situation had escalated far beyond a simple arrest was beginning to sink in. Chuck Norris remained seated calmly at the metal table, hands folded in front of him, his posture immaculate. There was no panic in his eyes, only quiet awareness. He had faced far worse, and he knew this moment was just another challenge to his patience and composure. The door burst open. The lead FBI agent, Agent Cooper, entered, flanked by a team of 4 others. His presence was commanding, each step purposeful. "Stand down," he ordered the local officers. "You've just been outclassed." Bradley stammered, "Sir, we..." Cooper cut him off sharply. "Do you even know who you arrested?" Chuck didn't answer. He didn't need to. His calm expression said it all. Cooper turned to the other officers. "Remove those cuffs. Now, you are detaining a national hero and decorated veteran, an advisor to federal operations, and a man who has saved countless lives. Do you understand?" Clark fumbled for words. We didn't." "Exactly," Cooper interrupted. "You didn't know? But ignorance doesn't excuse your actions." One by one, the cuffs were removed. Chuck rubbed his wrists slowly, taking care not to rush. The room was silent. Even the FBI agents were impressed by the controlled aura he radiated. Every officer present felt the weight of their error pressing down. Chuck stood, towering in presence without raising his voice. "Respect should be automatic," he said quietly, but every word carried the force of authority. "Respect should not depend on fame, recognition, or rank. You failed to show it, and now you face the consequences." The local officers exchanged glances, shame and panic written across their faces. Their morning of arrogance had been utterly dismantled. Outside, the story had reached the streets. By now, dozens of bystanders, alerted by the flashing lights and commotion, had gathered. Phones were held high, recording every moment. The video from earlier had gone viral, and now the FBI storming the station added another layer to the story. Shouts of recognition began to rise from the crowd. "That's Chuck Norris," one person yelled. "No way. He's a veteran," another added. The murmurs swelled into cheers. People began clapping, some shouting, "Respect! Respect!" Inside the station, the tension was palpable. Bradley and Clark were trembling. Sergeant Davis muttered, "We've just made the biggest mistake of our careers." Chuck turned toward the local officers, calm but cutting. "You assumed because of my appearance. You assumed because of my age. You assumed because you didn't recognize me. But assumptions have consequences. And today, you've learned that the hard way." Agent Cooper stepped forward, addressing the officers. "Internal Affairs will be reviewing this entire incident. You will be suspended pending investigation. This is a lesson, not just for you, but for every officer who thinks their authority can override basic human decency." Bradley swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Chuck's eyes swept over the room once more, finally resting on the crowd outside, who were still cheering and recording. "This is bigger than any of us," he said quietly. "It's about accountability, about understanding that respect is universal and never optional." The crowd outside erupted as the doors opened, and Chuck was escorted toward the FBI vehicles. Flashbulbs popped as reporters rushed forward, microphones extended. "Mr. Norris, do you have a statement?" He stopped and faced them, standing tall. "I am not here for fame, nor for revenge. I am here to remind everyone that dignity, respect, and integrity are not earned by title. They are expected from everyone." The vehicles drove away, and the crowd followed the story on their phones, live streams, and social media feeds. Across the globe, from Los Angeles to Manila, London to New York, viewers commented, "That's the definition of calm power. Even words can command respect." He didn't have to fight to win. He just showed his strength. And then came the engagement moment. If you think the officers finally learned their lesson today, type respect in the comments below. Let's show Chuck Norris that the world understands the importance of dignity and integrity. Back at the station, the local officers sat in silence. Their arrogance had been shattered. Bradley looked at Clark and muttered, "We have a lot to answer for." Chuck Norris, meanwhile, had already shifted focus. He was a man of action, not vengeance. As he settled into the FBI vehicle, he looked out the window at the crowd, taking in the support, the respect, and the awareness that this moment had become more than a personal victory. It was a lesson to the world. Do not judge a man by his appearance. Do not underestimate courage, composure, or integrity. The vehicle doors closed. Engines roared. The world watched. And one thing was clear. Chuck Norris had turned a wrongful arrest into a global statement about respect, humility, and accountability. The storm had passed, but its impact would echo far beyond that police station. The events of that day spread like wildfire. Within hours of the arrest and FBI intervention, news outlets around the world were broadcasting the story. Clips of Chuck Norris being wrongfully detained, his calm composure during interrogation, and the dramatic FBI storm went viral across social media platforms. Millions of people were watching, commenting, and sharing the story. In Los Angeles, a retired veteran shared the clip with his friends. "This is exactly how respect should be handled," he said. In Manila, a young martial artist posted, "Even without fighting, he taught a lesson more powerful than any punch." In London, viewers debated the misuse of authority and how courage can come in quiet strength. Across cities like New York, Dubai, Sydney, and Toronto, hashtags were trending. Hashtag respect the veterans. Hashtag Chuck Norris did nothing wrong. Hashtag justice for Chuck. The viral spread wasn't just about celebrity, it was about the principle. Chuck's actions resonated because they were universal. People everywhere recognized the injustice. A man who had served his country, who had fought for the safety of millions, being harassed simply because of his appearance at the local police department. Disciplinary actions were swift. Internal Affairs launched a full investigation. Officers Bradley and Clark were suspended with pay pending review, but their public reputations were already tarnished. Social media had caught their arrogance and poor judgment for the world to see. Even higher-ranking officers, who had initially defended their actions, realized the severity of the misjudgment. Press conferences were held, statements of apology were issued, and the story became a teaching moment for law enforcement agencies nationwide. The lesson was clear. Assumptions can ruin careers, and disrespecting someone based on appearance is unacceptable. Despite the chaos, Chuck remained humble. He never sought fame or attention from the incident. When asked by reporters about the event, he spoke calmly and deliberately. "I didn't need to prove anything today. What matters is respect, how we treat each other, regardless of who we are or how we look. Power is not in handcuffs or badges. Power is in dignity, courage, and integrity." He emphasized accountability and fairness, highlighting that respect should be given first, not earned. For millions watching, it was a lesson far more impactful than any viral video or media story. The story inspired people worldwide. Schools discussed it as part of lessons on ethics and respect. Veteran organizations applauded Chuck's calm and measured response. Martial arts schools posted videos analyzing his composure and mental strength. Social media flooded with comments praising his restraint and moral authority. This is how real heroes behave. No punches, no shouting, just respect and integrity. A lesson we all need to remember every day. Even celebrities and public figures joined the conversation, highlighting how humility and courage can be more powerful than aggression or fame. For Chuck Norris, the event was more than a personal victory. It was a chance to teach the world a valuable lesson. He had shown that true strength is not in force, but in composure. That respect is universal, not conditional. That even when wrongly accused or harassed, one can remain dignified and let actions, or restraint, speak louder than words. And as the story traveled across countries and languages, millions of people were reminded, assumptions are dangerous, humility is powerful, and courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes stands quietly, unwavering, and unshakable. For viewers, the message was clear. Stand up for justice, value respect, and never underestimate quiet strength. If you believe that everyone deserves respect, regardless of appearance, type respect in the comments below. Share this story and let the world learn from true courage. The police officers faced accountability. The nation witnessed a hero's composure. And Chuck Norris, as always, had let his actions speak louder than any words or any punches. The world had watched, and the lesson would not be forgotten.